The story of Queen Mary's Hospital begins 100 years ago. It's 1915, and World War I is already taking its fearful toll. Many thousands of men have been killed, and many more than that have been wounded. Boatload after boatload brought back the casualties. Some of the wounded were to recover with no serious damage, but others had lost limbs that they would never recover. One such was Private Frank Chapman, who had lost his left arm and his right hand. He was taken to Millbank Military Hospital. All that the government could give him were 2 leather sockets with hooks attached. Enter a remarkable woman, Mrs. Gwyn Holford. She was taken on the rounds of the hospital, and there she met Private Chapman, and here is how she recalled that meeting.
I saw, sitting at a table, with a look of utter sadness and hopelessness on his face, a man who had lost both his arms. I bent down and asked him to tell me his story. He looked up at me with eyes full of pathos and said, "Is this all my country can do for me?" This was Private Chapman, with a record of over 21 years' service. I then and there made a vow that I would work for one object, and that was to start a hospital whereby all those who had the misfortune to lose a limb in this terrible war could be fitted with the most perfect artificial limbs human science could devise.
Mrs. Halford was as good as her word. The hospital she started was at Roehampton, and she persuaded Queen Mary to be the patron. So Queen Mary's Hospital, Roehampton, was born. By June, just 6 months after that original meeting, the first 25 patients were admitted, among them Private Chapman. Mrs. Holford was a mover and shaker with powerful connections. Money was soon pouring in for the cause, and the hospital went from strength to strength. Human lives, as well as human bodies, were being rebuilt. As well as being fitted with new limbs, the men were being encouraged to enjoy themselves. And for many men, of course, that meant playing sport. Imagine what it felt like for this man to pick up a cricket bat again. Cigarette clamped nonchalantly between his lips, he hits everything firmly in the middle of the bat. Happy days are here again. Considerable trouble was also taken to teach them skills that would allow them to get back into the labour market once they'd been released from hospital. This group of soldiers are learning to make baskets. This man, a natural right-hander, is having to learn to write and type with his left hand. Frank Chapman had to face similar problems when he wrote to his fiancée Nellie.
Dear Nellie, you must think me frightfully slow at answering your letter. I don't like asking other people, so I'm having a go at it myself. I am fixed up with new limbs. Nellie, you will have your work cut out to understand this, but it is my best left hand, or should I say stumped hand. I hope you're quite well and happy. Cheerio, yours Frank.
In October 1916, Frank got married to Nellie, and the Guard of Honour was formed by other soldiers who'd lost limbs in the fighting. The happiness on Frank's face, in radiant contrast to the desperate figure that Mrs. Holford had first met. Now it was time to enlarge and expand the hospital. A huge workshop was built where the artificial limbs could be created. By the end of World War I, over 40,000 men had been equipped with new limbs. One of the photographers of the early days was one of the nurses, Muriel Twigg, and we know about Muriel because her great-niece, Jane Foley, is a consultant rheumatologist today at Queen Mary's, and she recently found a cache of Muriel's photos.
As you can see in this photograph here, she had a camera with her, and about a year ago I discovered a wonderful archive of photographs that she had taken. And she took some rather moving pictures of some of the people who came back from the war, often with amputations and burns. This chap here, who's obviously got a very high level amputation, hobbling around on his crutches. And again we have three of them standing here with only 4 legs between them. Here's a rather splendid photograph of Mr. O'Brien, and it does show very well what an excellent photographer she was. So Muriel herself was quite an athlete. She played hockey for Ireland, and this is a rather splendid picture, which is actually a newspaper cutting which she put in the album along with her own photographs, which was obviously taken at a sports day that was put on at Queen Mary's. And this shows the nurses in full gear, including their long skirts. This shows a trip they took out on the 28th of July 1917. Taken out on a trip on the river. This is down at the wharf, and the nurses went out with them to give them some different taste of life from the horrors that they'd come from.
Still photographs brought the plight of the limbless soldiers to a wider public. And as well as still photographs, the newfangled movie cameras were soon whirring away, and they were to prove another potent publicity weapon. The cameras could also capture some inspiring role models who could achieve astonishing feats. Mr. V. Weston, amputated above the knee, was a boxing instructor and is here shown in action in the ring. It's almost impossible to see which of the two boxers is the one with the handicap. Captain Baird had a highly successful golfing career with an artificial leg. He was also blissfully untroubled by bunkers. And perhaps most remarkable of all, Mr. V. Bell, amputation above the knee, who walked from London to Brighton in 14 hours. Moving on into the 30s, we come to perhaps the most famous Roehampton amputee, Douglas Bader. In spite of losing both legs in a flying accident, Bader played golf to an astonishingly high level and then went on to become a famous fighter pilot in the Second World War. One living link with Douglas Bader is Stan East, who is in charge of the workshops where today's prosthetic limbs are created. And how long have you been working at Queen Mary's?
I've been here since 1968. Okay. So that'll be 48 and a half years I would have done when I retire, so done my bit, I think.
Stan's memories go a long way back, and he remembers Bader's visits very well.
So he used to come to us and we used to treat him for his prosthetic care, and when he used to come to us we had a red carpet that we used to put out for him, and when he visited us This is a picture of the old building. Normally we'd come to this door here, and before he got here we would make sure that there was a red carpet laid down for him to walk on, and then walk into our fitting rooms, and then he would walk back out on it on his way out, and then when he'd gone we'd roll it back up again. That was how important everybody felt that he was to the limb service that we provided. Okay, these two legs were the legs that belonged to Douglas Bader. These would have all been made here at Queen Mary's Hospital, specifically for him.
At the start of the 60s, the thalidomide disaster came to public attention. Thalidomide was a new drug that was given to pregnant mothers before it had been properly tested, and this led to severe malformation of limbs. A thalidomide unit was set up at Queen Mary's to help with the aftercare. One of the thalidomide victims, or as she likes to put it, one of the thalidomide survivors, was Louise Meadows Mansell. Louise was born with no legs and malformed arms. Like many thalidomiders, Louise was a resourceful child, and as this film shows, she could get around in ingenious ways. Queen Mary's was asked to give her a pair of prosthetic legs, which were to be changed many times as Louise grew up and her body altered.
Well, from 5 to 7, I probably had 2 pairs of legs, and then from 7 to 11, it's probably 5, and then 11 to 13. It's every sort of like 2 years that you would get new legs.
When she was 7 years old, Louise bumped into a celebrity, literally.
I went outside, and as I was coming back in, I tripped over Douglas Bader's legs. He was sat there waiting in the waiting room, and I was going back in to have my legs taken off. The nurses were there to pick me up, but I just sort of like fell down, and I fell on my shoulder. I didn't know who he was until they got back, and then they said, "Oh, that was Douglas Bader," and I thought, "Oh, I don't know who he is." And then when I went back to Chailey, they'd put a film on Reach for the Sky, and I put 2 and 2 together. Douglas Bader to me was a hero because he had the attitude and which I thought you should have anyway. Just because you've got legs, doesn't mean to say it should stop you from doing things. And his film gave me the inspiration and determination to conquer whatever I could.
Louise is married to Darren, another thalidomide survivor, who has legs but who, like Louise, has malformed arms.
I was born in 1961. I'm a thalidomide survivor. This is one of the things that was made at Roehampton, particularly by Dr. Fletcher. It's what's called a dressing stick, basically used for pulling zips up and down. So you've got a down bit and an up bit. And I say this, it extends as well. And this is probably 40 years plus, because obviously I think the last time I went to Roehampton was 17 and I'm now 53, so work the maths out from that.
And this is what you use every day?
This is what I use every day.
Yeah.
If I didn't have this, I'd be lost. And I can always remember, I was talking to Dr. Fletcher, I'd probably be about 17 at the time, and I just took up football refereeing. And one of the criteria was you had to be a linesman. And obviously, with short arms, having a flag in my hand was a bit restricted. And he came up with a brilliant idea of a car aerial that you attach the flag to the end of it, which basically extended the flag as long as somebody's arm. So that was just one of the ingenious things that Dr. Fletcher came up with. I had a great affinity with him. He was a genius in his own right. There was nothing that he couldn't put his mind to and come up with. And he designed all these little gadgets and gizmos that probably most thalidomide have still got. One of the biggest things I found at Roehampton was we all learnt from each other. We learnt things like putting socks on and
How on earth, it never occurred to me this, but how on earth do you put your socks on?
with your feet and your big toe and
God.
it's
How long does it take?
and even
How long does it
seconds.
Seconds?
Few seconds. This is how we take socks off. Hook your big toe into the top of the sock, pull it out, and just pull it off. And then the same with the other foot. Pull it off like that. And then to put them on, it's a reverse thing. You put your big toe in to start with, to open the neck, and then literally grab the sock underneath with your big toe and pull it on and pull it up. And it was strange that when the kids come along, they started to copy us. I saw my daughter one day trying to put her socks on with her feet. So kids are very observant and they'll copy what you do. I mean, I'm all for it if they want to learn to do it with their feet. But yeah.
Good Lord. Yeah.
So we're trailblazers.
Yeah.
There's no such word as can't in our vocabulary, unfortunately. So.
Like most hospitals, Queen Mary's has gone through a process of evolution. It became a district general hospital in 1961, and since 1998 has been a community hospital, and is now proud to be part of St George's. But throughout this time, it has remained a leading centre for the rehabilitation of amputees. The thalidomide drug is fortunately a thing of the past. But many of today's patients have lost limbs through diabetes or septicemia.
It was like septicemia. I was perfectly well at Christmas, and I got ill on the 24th of December. Just to go and say, it's been really hard. I was perfectly fit and healthy before then.
What happened?
I caught invasive strep A as an infection, and then it initially took my both legs above knee, left arm above elbow, and then they managed to save my right arm through surgery, but then that was amputated in August last year, I think.
Coming into the gym every day is what keeps you upbeat. And I've got two small children, so that's what makes me so determined. That's why I want to do this so quickly. So it's a determination of my children that's got me through this.
I was a builder before
A builder?
this, yeah. So I was a builder. We did a lot of interior work, and my other half, she had a restaurant, and we had a pub as well, an outside catering company. So we were busy. Thankfully, we still got most of that apart from the pub.
You obviously can't do straightforward building, but have you got eyes on?
No.
Have you thought? You must have had thoughts on what you can do.
Well, yeah, I've gone back to work. I do interior projects now, so I do all the design work.
It's a fantastic place here, isn't it?
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. Well, it's best in the country. You know, everyone. When I was ill in Salisbury, there was no other talk but coming here, and it was the place to come as a NHS patient.
And the nurses are great, aren't they?
Fantastic.
Physios and all the rest of it.
Yeah. Oh, the advice you get is brilliant.
We try in the gym here. I think we try and create a kind of a positive environment and trying to bring out the best in people. But there's so many different characters and people through different situations why they've lost limbs, and some it is quite positive. Some they are going through their own kind of bereavement process. But at the end of the day, you know, we try and provide a sensitive approach and try and encourage people to achieve their goals to get back to kind of normal life.
Yeah. But when you're an amputee, you have to get on with it. You can't, to hide away and spend the rest of your life in your house doing nothing isn't. A lot of us we've all got life left in us, and we want to enjoy it just as much as we were enjoying it. And in this day and age, there's no reason why that can't be achieved with prosthetics.
Jeanette is another septicemia victim. who lost both her legs and an arm 10 years ago. During all this time, she has formed a close bond with her physio, Maggie Uden.
Did you find it difficult to keep your morale up when you came here?
Obviously you have ups and downs, but you just have to keep on fighting, keep on going on, you know. And you know that you're going to get better, you know there's a light at the end of the tunnel, you know. And when you're in, you see people that have been here before, and they come and you see them that they've managed to move forward, and that pushes you on.
Another of Maggie's patients, who lost both legs at the same time as Jeanette, is Martine Wright. Martine was a victim of a terrorist bomb in 2005. Martine has since taken up sitting volleyball, and she represented Great Britain in the London Paralympics.
I lost my legs the day after it was announced that London had won the Olympic and Paralympic bid. Of course, I count myself so lucky that I survived that day. I count myself so lucky that I found sport and you know, but I believe that this was a journey that I was always meant to make, and I was always meant to represent my country and a sport that I love, sitting volleyball, in my hometown. But you know what was really special was to have my family in the crowds. But for them to see their daughter, their wife, their mum, you know, on court representing their country after being through such a tragic circumstance, to be able to see them in the crowd and, for instance, Oscar holding up a banner saying, "Go, mummy, go," you know, just meant the absolute world to me.
So Martine and Jeanette, they were in hospital at exactly the same time, 2005. We nicknamed them the Terrible Twins because everything was so similar, but they're great and they're good friends, and it's been just fantastic to see like both of yours like achievements from you going back to full-time work and all the hobbies and the sailing. Nothing defeats Jeanette at all.
People think that, you know, it's all about physical and medical support, but my physio, who was Maggie Uden, you know, she gave me so much emotional and psychological support, and that for me was so special about that walking school. Was, of course, it taught me to walk again, but it basically put me back together again. And it was just like a little cottage hospital, and we were like one big family. And Maggie Uden, my physio, she came to my wedding. I mean, my wedding was a huge emotional day, and I remember again. This is what I'm talking about, the emotional and psychological side. I remember reenacting my service in the walking school.
And how to hand the stick. And
so she's going to walk down the aisle with no sticks, and we used one of our flowers, and we had, I think it was Dr. Siri at the time, or John, one of the prosters, being the vicar and a bridesmaid.
But that's what I'm talking about, the emotional side. It was them setting me up for one of the biggest days of my life. And I did it. They made me be able to walk down the aisle at my wedding without any walking aids. But Maggie, my physio, she turned around to me and she said, "Martine, I've got to get you a gift for your wedding." I was like, "No, you haven't got to get me any gift, because the gift you gave me was the gift of walking." And, you know, no present, no gift is ever going to compare to that.
Queen Mary's is most famous for its work with prosthetics, but over the years it has achieved excellence in many fields. In World War II, many British soldiers picked up diseases in the Far East while working as prisoners of war on Japanese building projects, such as the notorious bridge over the River Kwai. For several years, the Tropical Disease Unit at Roehampton did sterling work. Even more outstanding was the work done by the new Burns and Plastic Unit, which opened as early as 1923. It had a series of distinguished surgeons. Patrick Clarkson, who'd come to the fore in World War II, and after him were men like Jim Evans and John Clark. There was also a devoted team of nurses and support staff. We asked some of the people who had worked there why the unit had been so effective.
Queen Mary's was a very exceptionally friendly place.
Queen Mary's, as everybody knows, has two very long corridors. You come in, you walk down, and you walk right through. I think it's about half a mile. I can't remember what the actual length. But you met everybody you ever needed to meet. So you got to know everybody in the hospital. It was an amazingly friendly hospital as a whole.
We tend to stay on. We don't move. We don't say, I'm going off after working there for a few months. You know, most of us stays there for year after year.
They wouldn't have stayed if it hadn't been a happy place. And that is not particularly common in London hospitals for people to stay a long, long time.
Well, the great thing about Queen Mary's, which people do need to know in today's world, is that it isn't always important to follow red tape, and people should be brave enough not to go by the book all the time, but to somehow have a gut feeling of what is good for a patient and go with it.
James Partridge was one of many people whose lives were transformed by the unit.
Well, I was in a Land Rover and I was trying to drive it at a young age, just over 18, around a corner in Wales, which came up to me rather faster than I thought it would, and it was much sharper, and I turned this thing over on its side and petrol gushed out and explosion. Yes, I was transferred after 10 days, because this happened in Wales. I was transferred by ambulance to Queen Mary's, and this was to be my home, really, or a very safe cocoon for the next 4.5, 5 years.
It was probably one of the first big burns that I looked after, and it was a horrible burn, and his story was horrible, like many of them there. And so we all got to know James very, very well.
I think the surgeons were brilliant, all trained by Gillies, which I didn't know at the time. But the nurses, oh my goodness, yes. I mean, none of us patients could have survived without their care and their support. And it wasn't just the nurses. I mean, there were physiotherapists and occupational therapists. There was even a social worker who, you know, was a rarity in those times. But all of those people were important to me and to all of us, I think.
One of Jim Evans's ideas, which was, when I got there, it was in force, there were no mirrors in the entire unit. So they couldn't see themselves until they asked. And then, if and only if he felt that they were up to looking at themselves, then they would get a mirror.
And it took me 3 months to persuade them to give me a mirror. And you can see, as soon as I saw myself, I could see why it had taken them so long. And it was a shocking experience, which, you know, I shall never forget.
I think James, it was a huge shock to James when he first saw how he looked, because he was a very bright, good-looking, active, wonderful life ahead of him, teenager.
And once I'd seen myself in the mirror, hyper self-consciousness started to set in, and going anywhere beyond the confines of that ward was going to be tricky.
We take, allocate some of the young girls to take either the men or women down to the pub for a drink, which I think was liked by both sides. I think everybody liked that. But the patients found it very helpful, I think, as did the nurses. I think it was quite an insight for us also to learn and to see how people are treated with disabilities or disfigurement.
These were people that I'd really put my faith and trust in, who were really encouraging me, empowering me to do that. And it was very, 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 very wonderful to see. But I think they knew that this was a frightening experience for me, but they were right there for me.
James went on to write a book about his experiences, and he then set up a highly successful charity called Changing Faces, which helps people to come to terms with disfigurement. And as he says, Queen Mary's had helped to kickstart this.
If that staff team had not been as dedicated, if they hadn't been as sensitive to what I was going through, even though sometimes I was really furious with them and with the process and why it wasn't getting the right results as far as... but they gave me the sense that this was doable. It was doable.
I think there's a great danger today that we're not allowed to do so many things, and I think this is sad. I think you should, people are people, and people like to be treated as individuals. And Queen Mary's, the whole of Queen Mary's, with the limb surgery, with paediatrics, with the burns unit, with maternity too, actually, because they were allowed, and that was new in those days, they were allowed to have baths and have their children in a bath, and that was quite new in those days. We were able to do these innovative things, and you're not. At a big hospital, you can't. And so small can be very, very valuable.
That's really good. Make us look younger.
Don't fall off, A single adjective to describe Queen Mary's. Do you know what I'd say? I'd say home. I know that's not really an adjective, but I would call it as a big part of me. That will always be in that hospital. And it's home. It's home. It was home to me. And I still feel like when I go back, it's home. It's not the building, it's the people in it.